be a switch. But that switch is activated by the processes that are open, like my computer program, to the data coming in, which is the environment influencing the organism. So you can only attribute agency to something that has that degree of openness. And with my brother, I've outlined exactly how we think that happens. It's a tiny book produced by Cambridge University Press last year called Understanding Living Systems. And we declare at the very beginning, agency is a fundamental characteristic of all living organisms. And if you don't start with that assumption, you're not respecting the openness, the ability to almost do anything in regard to the environment and what the conditions are in which you're living. Without that openness, you don't have agency. The chemicals don't have that. So I think it's very simple. The organism as a whole certainly has it. I think that's almost definitive of life. Now, we can ask some very interesting questions then. How does agency arise? That's equivalent to asking the question, how did a bunch of chemicals come to become part of a living organism? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that. There's one of the open questions. There are people doing research on it. Can we, from what we know, work out how a bunch of chemicals could somehow or another come together to form an organism? But that's an open question. The point I'm making is, however it happened, and that's the open question, however it happened, that is what organisms are capable of doing. If we attribute that to artificial intelligence, then it doesn't make sense to not attribute it to you and me. In fact, it's absurd because we are the paradigm of intelligence that the artificial intelligence people are trying to develop. So I think it's very simple. I would argue, as my brother Raymond and I, he's a zoologist, incidentally, by training. We've argued that it's characteristic of organisms that they have agency, and that's because they're open to what the environment influences them to experience.
This is fascinating, and I think this is where I can put another view here. That us, the theist people, how do we make sense of it? And of course, we don't mean at this stage making a theological case for God, but it's more of a philosophical case for God. And let me make the argument and present the case. And I want to make sure that I fully express myself for your benefit. So it might take a minute to 2 minutes, but I'll try to be as quick as I can. We hold that there are only two types of things, either contingent beings or necessary beings. Contingent things, they need to have two essential characteristics that make them contingent. Number one, that they are dependent on something else. And number two, they cannot explain the existence and the purpose of their existence themselves. So you have to find those explanations elsewhere. And a necessary being, by definition, is something that is impossible to not exist. It is going to exist. It's impossible for it to not exist. So with that understanding, we apply a question on the biological entities, the organisms, that whether these organisms are necessary or are they contingent. And the answer is they are contingent, because whilst we know that they do exist, but it's perfectly possible that they don't, which means that they don't necessarily exist. Now, if they don't necessarily exist, then their existence is contingent. And if they can't explain the existence, the purpose, and the agency, that means that has to be sought elsewhere. And when we go elsewhere and look for the explanation, and we will find the explanation, then we ask the same question, whether this explanation was contingent or was it necessary. And then we look at another, if that explanation is not necessary, and then we go backwards on this sequence of cause and effect, and finally we conclude that there has to be a first uncaused cause that explains everything. Otherwise, we will end up in the realm of infinite regress, and that is pretty much unthinkable exercise. It simply doesn't solve anything. So at this stage, we don't go whether it's Allah who has done it, or Jesus, or or Christian or anybody else for that matter. We just say there has to be a creator, and that's not a theological case. So it's
That's
not a
perfectly
theological
fine.
case, it's more of a philosophical case. And this is how we start our journey and
Yes,
end up believing in God.
well, it even led some philosophers, Spinoza notably, to a very interesting view of what he thought the, as you put it, the first cause was, and he put it in Latin, Deus sive natura, God or the universe or nature. Nature, of course, was being used there for the world, um, and of course he was kicked out of his Amsterdam synagogue for having these views. That's another
It
story.
was
Don't need to
excommunicated,
go
yeah.
into that. No,
Yeah.
that's right. But the no, I fully understand the argument, and I go to the point of saying, well, um, the one thing I think I cannot answer is that, because coming back now to the question of the origin of life, that's still an open question. Of course, there's a very strong natural tendency for scientists to think somehow or other we'll understand the chemistry and the physics of the world such that we can then understand the way in which a living organism can come together. But we don't have that knowledge at the moment. And I take it as an open issue. That's why the last chapter of my book, Dance to the Tune of Life, has the title The Relativity of
Activity
Epistemology.
of epistemology,
The
yeah.
fact remain open to the possibility that we've got our understanding of the world deeply wrong. And isn't that what the cosmologists are now faced with? You know, we developed from very good observations made with earlier telescopes the theory that we know when the universe was formed, where the universe as we know it, we put it at 13.8 billion years ago, that it started off as an extremely compact thing, which exploded out and developed into what we now see. But that's a theory.
Yeah.
Nobody
Yeah.
can say with any certainty that is correct. And what people are doing now that the James Webb Telescope is producing more and more information is re-examining that theory, right down to the fundamentals of what actually do we mean by some of the terms we are using. Hawking, of course, went so far with the so-called Big Bang model. He went so far as to say, well, it was the invention of time, if you want to call it that, which is very strange. I don't even begin to understand that. You know, I am to some extent philosophically trained, and I respect a lot of philosophy. I think the arguments from, for example, Descartes in the 17th century as to how we have agency but animals don't. Well, Darwin would certainly not have agreed with that. I think it's absurd. And the arguments that occurred between, well, not directly between him and Spinoza, but Spinoza represented the other extreme. You know, you can once you give um, some sense of integrative activity. I think that's the way we put it in modern language to an organism. You're moving to very, very different issues that are raised. And he, as a philosopher, I think, fully understood that. But to come back to the point, I feel that we have to remain open to the possibility that our understanding of the universe is, at the moment, seriously in question as to how much we really do understand. We do not know yet how to resolve conflicts between our ideas of quantum mechanics and our ideas of special and general relativity. We don't know, therefore, how to produce a complete account of what we observe. And for so long as that is true, and it may always be true as far as I know, I think we should remain open. That's why I give let me put it this way, philosophically, metaphysical speculation, because that's what I would call it, reign to try and see what one can understand. And metaphysics should not be regarded as necessarily religious. I know this is a contentious issue, but I'm trying to explain my own position as carefully as I can, as you now explained yours. I think that there is no doubt that we use speculations about what exists and what can function, even in our scientific theories. Whoever has met the square root of -1. Now, why is it important? It's important because nobody can ever have met something like that. You can't have a square root of -1 number of apples or number of bananas. Yet, in mathematics, that is an exceedingly useful idea. And I see many aspects of metaphysics as more or less in that kind of category. Just one example, if you take somebody like Jerry Coyne, a strong neo-Darwinist in the United States, in his book, Why Evolution is True, and what he's stated since then, he thinks about the question of our agency, and he says, and I quote almost exactly, we have an extraordinary illusion that evolution has developed in us, that we can choose, that we have agency, is the way I would put it. But we don't. That's his belief, that's his metaphysics. We don't have agency.
That is metaphysics, yes.
That's right. And then he goes, that's where his metaphysics is. But then he goes on to the extraordinary statement. But we can ponder why evolution has developed this illusion in us. Now, what is pondering? It is thought. Thought about what? Do we agree with Coyne or disagree with Coyne? Are we not making a choice whichever way we go? And he is encouraging us to make that choice in the implicit understanding that he knows we've got agency, and yet he denies it. I conclude a physical argument to show why that is incoherent. And I think the test of metaphysics is it coherent? Does it form a logical whole? And I respect, therefore, religious believers who think they can see a logical whole in what they believe. Don't wish them to feel anything other than that if that's what they feel. But I also reserve the right to have my logical whole, which is my own metaphysics, which there is considerable doubt about what do we really know in the deep sense of these fundamental questions, which at the moment certainly we can't answer, and possibly, in my deeper feelings about it, possibly we will never answer. Maybe there just is a limit to what we can know.